Here's the rewritten version of your story, maintaining the original plot, context, and details while enhancing the narrative flow and engagement. Character names have been changed, highlighted in bold, to natural English names, and the story is crafted in fluent American English. The ending is clear and satisfying, and the length falls within the 2,000, 4,000 word range, approximately 2,600 words. I've streamlined repetitive sections for coherence and heightened the emotional stakes to make it compelling. "How could you be so selfish?" my father, George, bellowed. His face flushed as he stormed across the living room of their vacation home on Bear Lake. "Your sister needs that money for her new business. You've got more than enough." I stood frozen, gripping the property tax bill I'd just been blindsided with. What was meant to be a relaxed Sunday dinner had spiraled into an attack on why I wasn't doing my part anymore. My name's Claire Evans, and at 33, I've carved out a solid career as a self-taught day trader. I didn't grow up with wealth. Every dollar I have came from sleepless nights decoding market trends and taking smart risks. For 5 years, I'd quietly covered the property taxes on my parents' lake house, paid my younger sister Avery's car bills, and funded family trips without a word. It was my way of thanking the family that raised me, or so I'd thought. "Dad," I said, finding my voice, steadier than I felt, "I've been paying for everything for years. The property taxes, Avery's business trips, Mom's medical bills, insurance didn't touch. I've never asked for a dime back. But I can't keep this up forever." My mother, Helen, sat mute on the couch, staring at her clasped hands, avoiding my gaze. That stung more than Dad's yelling. "We gave you everything when you were young," George shot back, brushing off my words. "And now, when we need you, you're bailing on us while Avery tries to build something." That's when I spotted it, an envelope peeking out from under a magazine on the coffee table, stamped with official lettering. I glimpsed "Trust Fund" and "Avery Evans" in bold print. My gut sank. Before George could react, I grabbed it. "Claire, that's private," he snapped, but I was already reading, hands shaking as the cold truth hit me. My father had set up a hefty trust fund for Avery alone. The same man who'd told me there was no money for my college tuition, leaving me juggling jobs and studies, had stashed away a fortune for my sister while guilting me into funding their lives. "When were you going to tell me?" I whispered, a chilling clarity settling in. My whole life snapped into focus, the favoritism, the double standards, the endless demands masked as duty. George snatched the paper back, stuffing it into the envelope. "You weren't supposed to see that," he muttered. "Clearly," I said, my voice hollow. "Guess that explains why you never helped with my student loans." The pattern had always been there. Avery got ballet classes while I was pushed to focus on school. She got a car at 16 while I bussed tables to buy a beat-up sedan. She went to a private college with family help while I scraped by on scholarships and barista shifts. I chalked it up to timing or parenting quirks, never wanting to see what now glared at me. My parents valued Avery more. "Sweetheart," Helen finally spoke, her tone soft and placating in a way I now saw as calculated, "your sister needs more support than you. You've always been so strong, so independent. We're proud of how you've made it on your own." The warped reasoning stole my breath. I was penalized for succeeding while Avery was cushioned for leaning on them. "All those times I asked for help," I said slowly, memory surging, "when I worked 2 jobs in college, barely slept, when my car died and I couldn't fix it, when I needed a deposit for my first place, you said you couldn't. But the money was there, just saved for Avery." George shifted, uneasy. "Investments aren't that simple, Claire. We had to plan for the future." "Just not mine," I replied. I thought of the payments I'd made, $8, $700 a year for 5 years on this lake house's taxes, $12,000 for a new roof last summer, countless other costs, all while they built Avery's nest egg. "Taxes are due next month," George said, sliding the bill toward me, dodging the issue. "And the HOA raised fees." I stared, stunned by his nerve. After this bombshell, he still expected me to pay? Something snapped inside me, a reckoning. "I'll handle it," I said quietly, taking the bill. He relaxed, missing the steel in my tone. The drive back to my Salt Lake City apartment blurred past snow-draped mountains that usually calmed me but now felt accusing. I'd been a sucker. At home, I ignored my buzzing phone, likely George ensuring I'd pay, and opened my laptop. A folder labeled Family Finances glowed on the screen, a record I'd kept but never thought I'd use. 5 years of property taxes, $43,500. Avery's car payments when she couldn't afford them, $11,680. The lake house roof, $12,000. Helen's knee surgery extras, $8,200. Family trips I'd gifted, $22,400. Total, $97,780. My stomach churned. All this while they hid $350,000 for Avery. A text from Avery. Dad says you're being difficult about the taxes. Don't be selfish, Claire. I laughed, sharp and bitter. Another from George. We're counting on you. Don't let us down. No thanks, no recognition, just demands. The next morning, I called in sick and met Mark Thompson, the financial advisor who'd grown my portfolio since I started earning big 3 years ago. This is staggering, Mark said, scanning my spreadsheet. And no repayment? They're family, I said. I wanted to help. He set his glasses down. Claire, this is generous but unsustainable. You're stunting your future while enabling them. This isn't right. I see that now, I said. I just found out about Avery's trust fund while I've been footing these bills. His face darkened. That's a game changer. We spent 2 hours strategizing. I'd need notarized records, receipts, proof of every cent. Mark referred me to Ethan Brooks, a forensic accountant specializing in disputes. This could get messy, Mark warned. Family and money often do. I pictured the trust fund, years of no money, excuses, that tax bill shoved at me. I'm ready, I said, my resolve hardening. It's time they see what I've done and what happens when it stops. A week later, I sat in Ethan Brooks's office, surrounded by paper stacks. He dissected 5 years of my contributions. Your records are meticulous, he noted, sorting bank statements. Most don't track like this. Day trading had drilled precision into me. What's the damage? I asked, bracing myself. He slid over a report. $118, $745. Worse than I'd guessed. The extra $14,915 is lost investment interest, based on your portfolio's growth, he explained. I nodded, a mix of triumph and ache settling in hard proof of their betrayal. What's next? I asked. Depends, Ethan said. Legal action's an option, though family cases are tricky without contracts. Or we can compile this for closure or leverage. Leverage, I decided. As he worked, my phone pinged. George, haven't got the tax payment due soon. Avery, Dad says you're being petty after all they've done. Really, Claire? I muted them, letting them stew. 3 days later, Ethan delivered a notarized statement, every dollar I'd given, categorized, with Mark's validation. That night, Helen called. Claire, your dad's worried about the taxes. Due next week? Will you cover it? You're always so dependable. Her casual tone lit a fuse. Not this time, I said. A pause. What do you mean? I'm done paying for the taxes for anything. But we're counting on you. The money's allocated elsewhere. To Avery's trust fund? I asked. Silence. Your dad said you saw that. You have to understand. I understand I've given nearly $120,000 while you told me there was nothing for my education or rent. I'm done. I hung up, shutting off my phone, knowing George would erupt. The next morning, I canceled Avery's car autopay, removed myself from family accounts, and shifted $120,000 into a new fund, my future. The burden lifted. By noon, my phone exploded. Avery, the bank declined my car payment. Are you ruining my credit? Fix this. George, call me now. This is unacceptable. You can't ditch your duties. I ignored them, trading through a wild market day. Later, I played Helen's voicemail. Claire, please. Your dad's a mess. The tax notice has late fees. Avery might lose her car. Why are you doing this? Let's talk. No mention of the trust fund, just please to keep paying. My intercom buzzed. Miss Evans, your father's here, demanding entry, the guard said. He's loud. Tell him I'm not here. Call the police if he won't leave. 20 minutes later, my cousin Jake texted, saw Uncle George hauled off by security. What's up? You okay? Fine, I replied. Family money fight. He wrote back, about time you pushed back. They've favored Avery forever. His words hit deep, I'd thought no one saw it. That evening, Avery showed up, arms crossed. I opened the door but blocked her. What do you want? Explain why you're acting crazy. My payment bounced. Dad says you're screwing us on the taxes. Correct, I said. Why? Because I've shelled out $120,000 while Dad funded your $350,000 trust. Her face flickered, shock, guilt, then defiance. That's different. I need security. You've got your trading gig. While I paid your bills? She flushed. You never minded before. I didn't know I was being used. It's not that much, she mumbled. I saw the papers. She softened, touching my arm. I get you're mad, but we're family. Dad says we'll lose the lake house without the taxes. I stepped back. Not my burden. They've got your trust. You'd let them lose it? They've got options. Her mask hardened. That's unfair. No, Avery, this hasn't been fair. I shut the door. 2 weeks later, the tax deadline passed. I stayed silent, focusing on work and my portfolio, freed from family drains, it soared. Then an email from Uncle Tom, George's brother. Claire, what's with George and the lake house? He wants a $10,000 loan for taxes, says you've abandoned them. This isn't like you. I laughed bitterly. He'd rather beg relatives than tap Avery's fund. I replied with a PDF of my contributions and the trust fund details. Tom wrote back, holy crap, Claire. I had no idea. George said he's struggling to support you both equally. This shifts everything. Next, Jake called. Family meeting at your parents' this weekend. George called it Claire's abandonment. He's rallying them against you. My stomach nodded. There's more, Jake said. They're planning to guilt you into paying taxes and penalties, saying you're ruining the family legacy. You going? I asked. Yeah, and you should too. Set it straight. I've got your back. I agreed, nerves buzzing. Saturday, I arrived at my parents' in a sharp black suit, clutching Ethan's notarized records. The room hushed as I entered, George mid-rant by the fireplace, aunts, uncles, and cousins scattered around. Avery and Helen sat stiffly on the sofa. Claire, George said, recovering, glad you're here. We're discussing your refusal to help with the lake house. I bet, I said, setting my briefcase down. And I'm sure you shared all the financial facts. His eyes narrowed. This is about your duties. Interesting, I cut in, opening my case. Because I've got 5 years of records showing $118,000 I've paid, taxes, Avery's car, trips, while you built her $350,000 trust. Murmurs rippled. Aunt Linda piped up, what trust? I handed out summaries. I've covered nearly $120,000 while they claimed no money for my college or rent. Meanwhile, Avery got this. The room exploded, voices clashing. George's face reddened. This is private. Family matters, Uncle Tom snapped, standing. And families treat kids fairly. Support swelled, Linda and Tom stunned by the disparity. George glared, but I saw fear and grudging respect in his eyes. He stormed out, Helen trailing tearfully. Avery sat mute. I didn't know it was this bad, Linda said, scanning the papers. George painted you as the golden child who didn't need help. If you've paid those taxes, Tom added, you deserve a stake in that house. I don't want it, I said. Just fairness. Jake gripped my shoulder. They need consequences. 3 days later, George texted, property taxes are due. No apology, just entitlement. That night, Helen called. Claire, your dad's struggling. The lake house means everything. More than treating us equally? Her silence spoke volumes. I've given $120,000, I said. He gave Avery $350,000. This stops here. Next morning, I texted George a photo of my notarized records, the $118,745 circled. No words needed. An hour later, Avery called, rattled. Dad showed me your files. $118,000, is that real? Verified, I said. I had no clue, she said, voice breaking. He said you chipped in a little, not this. I feel awful. Dad set it up, I said, but you benefited. I never questioned it, she admitted. I'm fixing this. She hung up. The next day, George's lawyer sent papers. The taxes were paid, and I now owned 25% of the lake house. Avery had used her trust to cover it. George texted, this wasn't needed. Family helps family. I ignored him, he still didn't get it. Helen wrote, your dad's struggling, but I'm proud you stood up. I should have too. Then Avery called. I told Dad to split the trust equally. He fought, but Tom and Linda pushed. It's happening tomorrow. Relief hit, not for the cash, but the equity it symbolized. Thanks, Avery, I said. No, she replied, thank you for waking us up.